This is Claire Lopez with the Center for Security Policy. We are here today with good friend and our author, Jim Simpson, to talk about his new monograph for the Center, the RedGreen Axis 2.0. So I want to welcome all of you and thank you for joining in with us today for this important discussion about Jim's new book, which takes its place as an addition to the Center's Civilization Jihad Reader Series. Jim Simpson, welcome, and thank you for all that you have done with us and with this new book. Jim is an author, but not just an author. He's a businessman, economist, investigative journalist, and an invaluable contributor to the Center's expanding shelf of published works. Now, his work has been published in many different places, in addition to the Center: Accuracy in Media, American Thinker, at Breitbart, the Capital Research Center, the Daily Caller, PJ Media, Washington Times, and elsewhere. And he's also been featured in various documentaries, including the one called The Enemies Within. Yeah. That is from our good friend Trevor Loudon. Also, Grinding America Down, Agenda. It's Masters of Deceit. And then most recently, the new video from Brannon Howse, our good friend in Tennessee, Sabotage: How the Islamists, Marxists, and their useful idiots are destroying America from within. With quite the resume, Jim has now penned for us the second monograph that comes out in the Center's series. The first one, let me mention, was published in 2015 by the Center for Security Policy, called the RedGreen Axis: Refugees, Immigration, and the Agenda to Erase America. And that first book laid out the networks of hard left nonprofits, foundations, and also government agencies that are bringing wave after wave of third world immigrants into the United States for profit and also, as we've seen, mayhem. Now, with the publication of this second new book, the RedGreen Axis 2.0, an existential threat to America and the West, America and the world. Jim has expanded on these themes, and he lays out in quite a bit of additional detail the agenda and the elements of the RedGreen Axis. So, to start our discussion here today, Jim, I thought I might begin by asking you, when we talk about the RedGreen Axis, right, where does that term come from? What does it mean for us in the context of your books as you've written here?
Well, actually, I think it's a really succinct way to describe this alliance or conspiracy, if you will. And I have to say, the RedGreen Axis is the brainchild of your former president and CEO, Frank Gaffney. I'd love to take the credit for it, but that was the phrase that he coined after first reading my first draft of the first book. And I thought that was just a perfect title for it. What it refers to is the alliance between the radical left, the communists, the socialists, the Marxists, the progressives, if you want to call them that, and the various Islamic groups in the United States, primarily represented by the many different Muslim Brotherhood groups in the U.S., but this is not limited to the United States. This is an international movement. This is an international collaboration, but because the United States is the primary target and the most credible opponent to these groups, it is primarily focused on the United States. But as we see, the same thing is happening in Europe, and they have been much more successful in Europe than they are here. We are kind of basically we're the last place, and if we fall, the world goes as we go. And that's why I subtitled it, An Existential Threat to America and the World. And it truly is. And it's been building relentlessly, really, or it's been building for decades, but has come out of the closet, so to speak, right before our eyes since the election of President Donald Trump, because he's the first politician, I think, in a long time to actually present a credible threat to their various agendas.
You know, Jim, I see you've got a copy of the RedGreen Axis 2.0 with you here, and it's tabbed up in many places. I wonder if you might point out for us and our viewers here some of the elements of the RedGreen Axis. Let's focus on the United States as you are. Yeah. But tell us about some of the players in this axis. Who are they? Who are among the red, the Marxist, hardcore communist left, and who are among the green, the Islamic side of the axis?
Well, of course, as I say, regarding the green, it's primarily the Muslim Brotherhood groups in the United States, most publicly represented by the Council on American Islamic Relations. They have probably the foremost presence in the public sphere and the media, and they are the most outspoken. But there are many, many other Muslim groups on campuses. It's the Muslim Students Association, which, as you know, is the oldest Muslim Brotherhood group in the United States. There's the Muslim American Society. There's the International Institute for Islamic Thought, which was actually has been credited with founding those other organizations, including the North American Islamic Trust and many others. And for example, most recently they published this year's version of the Islamophobia report, where they basically target anybody who they see as an enemy to their agenda as quote unquote an Islamophobe. But this is just an extension of an agenda that the left has been pursuing since really early in the last century, which is a wholesale agenda to discredit all aspects of the United States, but most prominently by manipulating our language and by, you can't say it anymore, calling us names, calling us racists, bigots, homophobes, xenophobes, and Islamophobe is just the latest twist on that agenda. And the whole idea is to discredit America, American constitutional values, our beliefs, our system of government, and it's very deadly, and they are now allied with many of the tech companies in the United States who deplatform and try to silence us on much of the social media. The threat to the First Amendment is right up front, very existential today. I have a bit about that in the RedGreen Axis, but that is really something to be very concerned about. The red groups that you asked me about, well, pretty much they own the commanding heights, if you will, of popular culture. And I've been asked, why are you so concerned about groups like the Muslim Brotherhood? Muslims comprise about 1% of the U.S. population. Well, by partnering with the radical left in the United States, or the left generally, they have access to and are allied with people who control all the commanding heights of popular culture. Media, Hollywood, universities, even secondary schools, and a major component of our political infrastructure at the federal, state, and local level. And of course, I'm talking primarily about the Democrat Party, but not entirely. And so the left has penetrated all the institutions of culture in the United States. And by allying with them, the Greens, the Muslim Brotherhood groups and so forth, enjoy that same power. And so it really is a very, very dangerous and omnipresent force. And the thing that is an advantage to the left of having the Muslims in their camp is that under the guise of religion, they can claim protections under the First Amendment while at the same time doing everything they can to subvert our laws and infiltrate our churches and turn the narrative against us.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're like a wrecking crew for the left.
And they're doing it all within the legal framework of our own constitutional system.
Absolutely. Yep. Yep. Yep.
You know, Jim, back in your first book, you talked a lot about the various players involved in refugee resettlement.
Sure.
And the inflow of immigrants from different places under federal programs.
Yeah.
And now this book expands even further on those remarkable charts and graphs, by the way, that you'll find in both books, the first book and the second book of the RedGreen Axis, showing numbers over the years. And also, I think, very importantly, the funding. Yeah. The amounts of money that are involved flowing not just from the federal government, but from other places that support and really enable these flows of immigrants and refugees. Would you want to talk about those numbers a little bit and those remarkable charts you have in these books?
Thank you. Yeah, and you know, you really, this information is not easy to compile because the government does not make it easy for you to find it. You have to pour through all kinds of different publications. And the thing about the immigration system in the United States, especially with refugee resettlement, is that it's managed by 3 different agencies. It's managed by the State Department, the Health and Human Services Department, the Office of Refugee Resettlement, and by DHS under the U.S. Citizen and Immigration Service. And then there's even some inner help from the Department of Justice, Executive Office of Immigration Review, and other agencies. So to put together the data and get a real comprehensive picture of what it's all about is difficult and time-consuming. But I have, for example, a chart of the refugee resettlement program starting in 1980, going all the way forward to 2018. And the thing about it is it doesn't just involve refugees. It involves refugees and 5 other categories of immigrant. And ironically, under the Trump administration, the last 2 years, actually the last 3 years, 2017, 2018, and now 2019, the refugee resettlement official program numbers have gone to historic lows, where in 2018 and now in 2019, there'll be about 22,500 refugees resettled in the United States as compared to the historical average. It was more like 70 or 80,000.
It's a big difference.
Big difference. So that was a very big impact the Trump administration made. Again, of course, under a different administration, it could be flipped overnight, but that's a big deal. However, the other categories that come under the heading, the general heading of refugee, have exploded. And that includes special immigrant visas, which are for people from Iraq and Afghanistan that assisted us in the wars there. Another one called the Cuban Haitian Entrant Program, which is essentially a separate refugee resettlement program for Cubans and Haitians. And in 2017, that number was almost 90,000.
Wow.
And asylum seekers, of course, who are generally not the asylum seekers that we talk about from the southwest border. They're not really asylum seekers. That's a fraud. But people that come from all over the world seeking asylum in the United States, there's about 30,000 of those every year, plus their families. But the biggest category, of course, is unaccompanied alien children, really unaccompanied illegal alien minors. And last year there was about 50,000 of them. Right now, this year, we are talking about, when you add in families, 1 million people. And that's because of all the people that are flooding the border. But many of those are alien children, and they have a special carve-out in federal law, and the Office of Refugee Resettlement resettles them all over the United States. And ironically, it is the biggest component of the refugee resettlement program. There are 9 refugee resettlement contractors. Combined in 2018, they received $344 million to resettle refugees. In 2018, the unaccompanied alien children contractors together received $1.5 billion.
Wow.
And 2 of them, which is the Baptist Child and Family Services and another one called Southwest Key, between them made $1 billion of that.
This is amazing
and that's in
research.
2018 alone.
You've really done amazing research in putting these numbers together. And it's even more graphic when you actually look at the charts on these pages. Jim, I want to take you back maybe to one of the early chapters of this new book. I think it's the second chapter, called Diversity is Not Our Strength.
Right.
Can you explain what you mean by that in the context of immigration and refugee resettlement coming into the U.S. from the 4 corners of the earth? We're talking about all of these numbers, enormous numbers of people, although declining. What do you mean by diversity is not our strength?
Well, we've heard that term everywhere, right? Diversity is our strength. In fact, after Nidal Hassan murdered 13 people in Fort Hood, the Army commander said they were a sacrifice and diversity is more important. It was a shocking statement. Different cultures, different populations. It's wonderful. Wonderful. I like to go out to have Indian food at dinner, and I enjoy talking to people from different cultures. But when you put hundreds of different cultures together in the same place, they inevitably clash, because these people from the places they come from have their own separate and distinct culture, and a lot of times they just don't mix. Now, the United States is probably the most successful nation in the world at assimilating different cultures because of our free market capitalist system, where people, our number one concern is to survive and prosper and raise our families, and that's pretty universal, I think. So when you have people coming here from diverse cultures and they are free to interact with others to increase their affluence, if you will. And this is our nation, our type of capitalist system facilitates and encourages that. However, when you are bringing in cultures from all over the world, many of whom are heavily welfare dependent, don't speak English, and have no understanding of the concepts that created this country, that made it great. They're extremely welfare dependent, and they create burdens in small communities that are way outside of their numbers. For example, one of my favorite tables in this whole book is Table 1, English language learners in K-12 U.S. public schools. How many people know how many languages? Do you know how many languages are spoken in public schools?
Hundreds upon hundreds.
400. Over 400 different languages in public schools. And this table talks about, for example, Lincoln, Nebraska. Public schools, there are 125 different languages spoken in public school. And many of these languages have no translators. Many of these languages are unknown languages from foreign lands with no translators. Some have no written language. How do you teach high school students or secondary school students, how do you teach them to thrive and prosper when we can't even get the teachers necessary to teach them? In Lewiston, Maine, before the 2001, their English language learner program cost the public school system a couple of $100,000 a year. Now it's over $3 million a year. It was a couple of dozen students in 2000, and then they had a mass influx of secondary refugees from Georgia, mostly Somalians, about 5,000 people. Now 25% of the student body does not speak English.
It's a big number.
And it costs thousands of dollars extra for each one of those students. And the local taxpayers are taking that burden. They are taking the burden of getting translators for courts. They are taking the burdens of the increased police presence that's necessary, all the health problems, numerous health problems. That does not strengthen a community.
We're here today talking with author Jim Simpson and discussing his new book, just out at the Center for Security Policy, the RedGreen Axis 2.0. You know, on this subject of diversity, Jim, you're talking about some very practical issues right here with regard to language and the translators necessary and the educational facilities and resources necessary for that. But this reminds me of something else. Perhaps even more to the point as regards diversity, and that is, how does the United States government ensure, or does it, that those coming in on these flows of refugees and immigrants are here in order to, and with the express intent of assimilating, of accepting a Judeo-Christian based constitutional legal system? How do we ensure that they are amenable and will be amenable to assimilating into that society, our society, that system? And I'll recall just quickly, back on the presidential campaign trail of 2016, we heard now President Donald Trump talking about extreme vetting. And for just such purposes as these, are the newcomers, going to be good fits, not just economically with the skill set necessary to support themselves and families, but ideologically, and not just where they come from, but what they carry in hearts and minds. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Absolutely. Well, for example, this is something that few people focus on, and it's shocking to me. One of the largest populations of people that come to the United States annually, legally, and are given legal permanent residence are people from communist China. It's about 70,000 people a year. Overall, from communist countries, there are about 200,000 people a year from communist nations. Now, I'm not saying they're all communists, but I've studied communism for 30 years, and I know for a fact communist nations do not let their citizens immigrate.
Well, especially
to
if
another
they're
country.
dissidents, right? If they're opposed to the system, they're not the ones who are going to be allowed out.
Right. So, for example, communist China might let 70,000 citizens immigrate to the United States, but there's a hook and a line going back to China for every one of those individuals. And if they fall out of line, or if they're needed by the Communist Party for any reason, they just pull on that hook, because they know there are families back at home who are going to be impacted if they don't do what they're supposed to. So I have an example where there was a Falun Gong protest in San Francisco, and the Chinese Communist diplomatic mission there was able to bring in 6,000 Chinese students and Chinese American residents to counter-protest against this protest. And then, of course, with the Muslims coming into the United States, mostly through the refugee program in much larger numbers than they used to, they are being directed by their leaders not to assimilate. They are being directed, and I quote the book, I quote Linda Sarsour, who said, in 2017, our number one and top priority is to protect and defend our community. It is not to assimilate and to please any other people in authority. Our obligation is to our young people, our women, to make sure our women are protected in our community, and our top priority, even higher than all those priorities, to please Allah and only Allah. So she is telling the Muslim community what their orders are, what they have to do,
well,
how
and
they need
more
to
to
behave.
the point, I mean, we have direct, anecdotal, but direct accounts of imams in mosques in America.
Yep.
And when the newcomers first arrive and they go there, they are told much the same thing.
Right.
Do not assimilate. You are here in America, but you are not to assimilate. Is that what you have heard as well?
Absolutely, absolutely. And in fact, Ann Corcoran covers that quite well in her book, Hijra to America.
Exactly.
Yeah, and there's no doubt about that. And I think, a lot of Muslims that come to this country are like everybody else. They want to come here. They want to assimilate. They want to enjoy the benefits of our society. They want to raise their children in safety and security and relative affluence. But they really don't have a choice. They really do not have a choice. And as the mosques in this country have become more and more omnipresent, the impact of the imams is become much more powerful. As we're discussing these issues and realizing the national security import of what you're talking about, Jim, again, author of the new Center for Security Policy book, the RedGreen Axis 2.0, as we're talking about these issues, I think what probably comes to the minds of many watching and listening here is that this has real national security implications. Absolutely.
Not just for the fabric of our society, the first things, principles, foundation of our constitutional republic, but for genuine, actual national security. Now, do you get the sense, that our national security leadership, whether it be at the Department of Homeland Security, the National Security Council, the White House, that they're actually aware of some of the things you're telling us and come from your new book, the RedGreen Axis 2.0. Do they understand what you are warning us about in this new book?
I think largely no. I think largely the national security infrastructure in our nation has been penetrated for a long time, but it very much increased over the years of the Obama administration with radical leftists at every level, and also Islamic activists from various Muslim Brotherhood groups, and they have actively opposed our ability to create a viable national security strategy to oppose these threats. I mean, they're really they're enemy agents penetrating and subverting our national security infrastructure. And I believe that has occurred to a large extent. And, you know, with the media as it is, with the popular culture as it is, and with the generalized dumbing down of our education, I think a lot of people, even military leaders, come in with a very misdirected and misguided view of what's going on in our nation. I mean, you know, since the 50s, anybody who talks about communist penetration is just a McCarthyite or a red baiter. And the fact of the matter is that the communist penetration of our government was 10 times worse than McCarthy even indicated.
Certainly.
And it hasn't gotten any better since then. It's gotten worse, because while we were all asleep at the wheel and we were all intimidated by the label McCarthyites, that was their open door to come in and infiltrate. And if you think about it, you know, people talk about conspiracy theories. I talk about military strategy. When you confronted a mighty military country like the United States, do you confront it with conventional weapons? No, you confront it with subversion.
Exactly.
You take advantage of its weaknesses, and our weakness is the fact that we're a very open society, a very permissive society, and we're also a very generous society. They use all of those aspects of our society against us, and that's just good military strategy, frankly, from their side. That's all it is.
You know, as we wrap up our discussion here today with Jim Simpson, author of the new book, The RedGreen Axis 2.0, I know that many of our listeners and viewers are probably thinking, well, as a private citizen, what can I do? What can I do about this? How can I bring this to the attention of those who really need to know about it? Jim, what would you say to these folks who really want to be active and engaged citizens? They're already informed citizens because they're listening to our broadcast here today. But what can they do at the local level, perhaps vis-a-vis their own local level elected officials or those who might be running for elected office? What can they do? What can we, the people, do to help better inform those who make and direct our national security policy?
One thing they can and should do is buy my book.
Good idea to start.
But, you know, I was on a conference call with some pastors a week or so ago, and they said that there are, between non-registered and those who are registered but never vote, there are 40 million Christians in the United States, either not registered or not voting. People need to get involved. People really need to get involved in pushing these narratives, getting them out there. It's not going to happen through the mainstream media.
No.
It's not going to happen in the university. It's probably not going to happen in secondary schools. it's up to us. We need to become informed and active in our constitutional republic. It's as Franklin said, a republic if you can keep it. And the only way we can keep it is by being informed people. Informed and engaged people. That's absolutely critical. And there's no, people say, what can we do? There is no magic pill. There is no simple solution. You can't just call this number. You can't just elect that person. You can't just do this one thing and that and then go back and flop down on your couch and watch TV. You have to be engaged. You have to be engaged full time. And I would say at the present time, it's more critical than ever to be engaged because we see the evidence of how the RedGreen Axis is moving forward and its momentum is building. They will take over this country and they will destroy this country. And if this country goes down, the entire world goes down. It's almost like, the parasite eating the host. Why are they doing it? It's insane, but it's what is happening. And if they succeed, it will be calamitous for the United States and for the world. And you have to see it in that light.
Well, and on that rather somber note, I thank you, Jim Simpson.
Thanks so much for having me.
Author of the new book at the center, The Red-Green Axis 2.0, available in free PDF download at our website, centerforsecuritypolicy.org, or at the shorter URL, if you prefer, securefreedom.org, and also available for purchase on Amazon.com. I thank you, Jim, very much for your scholarship, for your excellent research, and your excellent insights into this incredibly important area of national security. And I thank everybody on the call today, on the broadcast today, for joining with us. And I encourage you to please have a look at our website, centerforsecuritypolicy.org, and do please go to Amazon and buy the book, Red-Green Axis 2.0. Thank you, Jim, and thank you to all of our watchers and viewers and listeners.
Thank you.